Greetings students, this is Professor Gear Chronicle back with another lesson today. And for today's lesson, we will be doing Deck Building 101. Now, when you're building your decks, the most important thing you have to remember is that each card has its own grade and attack power. But we'll be going into further detail in that today. To illustrate this, we have Crested Dragon, Embodiment of Shield Lam, Dragon Monk Gojo, and Wyvern Kid Dita. So let's go into further detail with each of these cards today. Let's start with Wyvern Kid Dita, for example. So Wyvern Kid Dita is basically what's known as your starting Vanguard. Most units in the early days were just 6k vanillas and stayed in the soul. But there are also cards that are known as Forerunner units. I'll illustrate this with Gojo real quick. So example, if you ride on top of Dita, for example, you can move Dita to another rearguard circle. That's basically how the card works. But with the V series of Vanguard, for example, our starters have a different effect. When you place on top of them, they stay in the soul, but you also basically you draw another card. These units have an attack power ranging from 5 to 4,000 power, and the most of them have 10,000 shield value. But there are also other grade zeros that you can use as your starter. Next up, we go to our grade 1, in this case, Dragon Monk Gojo. Now these range from... Now the power level of these range from 6 to 8k units, or in the case of Excel clans, 9k. Now both Dita and Gojo have a special ability, what is known as a boost. As I explained in our previous lesson, when you have these two units in the same column, you can base the power from that unit is transferred to this. So an example, if I was boosting with Dita, Dita's 5,000 power will be transferred to Gojo's 8,000 power. In this instance, it would be a 13k attack. Both of these units have the boost ability, which can also be a skill that can be transferred to our grade 2 units. We next have our grade 2 units, in this case, Embodiment of Shield Lam. Most of these have power levels ranging from 10 to 8,000 power, or in the case of some units, 11,000 power. As you can see, Embodiment of Shield Lam is your standard 10k. It's your standard 10k vanilla. Vanilla is what community refer them to as. This guy has 10,000 power and 10,000 shield, but all grade 2s have a special ability, what's called an intercept. No, not the football move. Intercept. Basically, you can move this unit from a rearguard circle to the guardian circle, basically adding another layer of defense. And as I mentioned, some grade 2s have the ability to gain the boost. Last but not least, we move into our grade 3 units, in this case, Crested Dragon. Now, for those who are curious about the force markers, or imaginary gifts, I already went into detail in our previous lesson. In case you missed it, check out the previous lesson, because I am not going to repeat myself today. Now, most units either have power levels between 9,000, 10,000, 11,000, which was the maximum power at the time, but with the V era, we have units that are 13k and 12k attackers. But they also have an ability called Twin Drive, which allows you to flip over 2 cards on top of your deck. Unfortunately, these cards do not have shield values, and you cannot intercept with them. But the only way to get rid of them is with your perfect cards. But deck building is more. But there's more to deck building than just these 4 cards, which I'll show you. So when it comes to our triggers, there are 5 types. There are generally actually 4 types that we want to work with. Originally, we had critical triggers, heal triggers, draw triggers, and stand triggers. But with the introduction of the V series, we have front triggers now, meaning we have 5 types of triggers to work with in the premium format. But for standard, there are no stand triggers, only these 4. Premium, it's these 5. So I'm going to go into more further detail with these triggers today, as I did not do that in our previous lesson. With our critical triggers, basically you can apply extra damage to your opponent. This is extremely important during a twin drive or triple drive when you reveal multiple critical triggers and can deal lots of damage. But in the event you get about to reveal the card for your 6 damage and end up revealing a heal trigger. Now heal triggers are the second most important card to crits, because if you have more or equal damage than your opponent, you can move 1 card from your damage zone straight to the drop zone. This is extremely important, but they can also be used for another card effect, which I'll explain later. Next we have our draw triggers. This basically allows you to draw more cards, thus bolstering your hand, thus bolstering your defensive hand when you have to guard on the next turn. This is awesome. As I mentioned, draw triggers also got a new upgrade with the draw trigger PGs, which I already explained. Next we have what's called a stand trigger. This is for decks that are stand trigger heavy. For example, so I'll explain how these work. Say when you reveal this trigger when your Vanguard attacks and you have a rear guard that's already attacked. What you basically do is, this trigger basically allows another rear guard to stand. And, though in the case of some clans that have the ability to stand themselves, like Nova Grapplers, they're practically useless. But in most clans, they're pretty useful. Like, for example, the Pale Moon clan. And last but not least, we have our front triggers, which I already went into more detail. When revealed, these triggers can basically add 10,000 power to your whole front row, and in the case of the Excel clans, this is extremely dangerous. Like, for example, you could have 5, 6, 8 units in the front row with Excel and reveal a front trigger to get a lot of power. But most players don't normally go no more than like 4 or 5 front row units. So when you're building a deck, the maximum amount you can add of triggers is 16. The general build in trial decks, the build went mostly like this. You had 4 critical triggers, 4 heal triggers, 4 draw triggers, and 4 stand triggers. This was the case with most decks since the very first set. However, with the introduction of the Aichi and Kai decks, we have 8 critical, 2 types of critical triggers, 4 heal, 4 draw triggers. However, in the upcoming Leon set, we will be having 4 crit, 4 front, 4 draw, 4 heal. This is going to be the lineup, I assume, for the Leon deck, but I'm not too sure. Now that we covered the basics of our deck, it's time to actually learn how to build a deck. Fortunately, for this example, we will be doing a mock build here. This is not an actual build. So in this case, we'll be doing a Kagero Premium build using a mix of new cards and old cards. So, for our starter, we will be working with Lizard Soldier Conroe. This is your main starter for the deck. And as I mentioned earlier, you can have a maximum of 16 triggers. But in the case of our build, we have 4 Demonic Dragon Mage Rakshasa, 2 Fire Chase Dragons. So this is basically 6 critical triggers we're working with a maximum of 8. We also have 2 Gatling Claw Dragons, 4 Red Gem Carbuckles. We have 6 draw triggers so we can bolster our draw power. And last but not least, we have our 4 heal triggers. In this case, Dragon Dancer Tara. Now these are a different kind of heal triggers, and I'll explain those later on. As I mentioned earlier, you can play up to a maximum of 16. You must play 16 triggers overall. Oh, no more, no less. That's how most decks work. The next lineup we will be working on is our grade 1 units. In this case, we are playing 4 Lizard's General Conroe, 2 Dragon Monk Gojo. Well, you can actually play 2 or 3 actually, but this is a mock build we're doing. 4 Lava Flow Dragons, and last but not least, we have our Perfect Guards. In this case, Flare Trooper Damajid, or Dunjid, depending on how you say it. So basically, these are our Perfect Guards that we'll be working with in our deck. Next, we have our grade 2 units that we'll be playing with. In this case, we have 2 Berserk Lord Dragons, 2 Burning Horn Evolutes, 4 Emperor Dragon Knight Nahalem, and 4 Spillover Dragon, for a total of 12 grade 2s. You can play 11 or 11 if you want, but most people play 7 to 8 grade 3s. Speaking of which, our grade 3 lineup, we have 2 Vortex Dragons, 2 Dragonic Overlords, new version, and last but not least, our main unit of the deck, Dragonic Overlord, the Legend. Along with Conroe, all these together make a deck of 50 cards. This is how most decks actually come pre-packaged, but you can also customize your deck to build that way. With some clans, you actually have to build your decks from scratch. This is the case for Spike Brothers, Tachikaze, Mega Colony, and Murakumo, and many other clans. But like I mentioned earlier, you can either play there are 8 grade 3s or 7 of them. Altogether, these cards make about 50 cards exactly, which is exactly how you want to play, how your deck must play. You cannot play a deck of over 50 cards. If your deck has over 50 cards in the main deck, you can't play in tournaments. Your deck has to be legal. Also, all the cards in your deck have to be of the same clan, via the clan fight rules. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I will be explaining G units and G Guardians. But first, I want to show you a special rarity that some players can look for. This is a Dragonic Blade Master, actually. But if you look closely, sorry. A second. This is actually what's known as a SP, or special rare, or SPs, depending how you work with it, how you pronounce it, how many you want to say it. These are a special rarity that a lot of people are sought after for. But in the case of our G era, we have 2 kinds of units that we can work with. We have our G units. It's, in this case, Dragonic Blade Master Titan, and our G Guardians. Now, remember when I mentioned that heal triggers are more important than ever now? Well, it's because heal triggers can actually pay the cost for G Guardians. when you're basically during your turn, you can actually discard one of those heal triggers to your drop zone in order to call a G Guardian to the Guardian Circle. These are mainly defensive units with special abilities. Now, when you're playing a heal trigger, you don't get any other effects, unfortunately. That is actually not the case with Tar, for example. If you discard her for a G Guardian, you can either countercharge or soul charge. Countercharge is basically flipping over one card in your damage zone, and the soul charge takes the top card from your deck and you place it in the under your. And soul charge is placing a card from the top of your deck underneath your Vanguard. These two units are extremely important. Now, originally, when the G units first came out, you were only allowed to play 8 of these. But with the introduction of these cards, the zone got bumped to 16. So most players play a maximum of 16 unit cards in their G zone. And these cards are also another grade up. They are grade 4. And they also have another ability called a triple drive. This basically means you can flip over 3 cards, but there are some G units that can give you an extra drive, or what we call quad drive. This basically means you can flip over 4 cards. And there's also one card, Draconic Overlord the Purge, which allows you to flip a maximum of 5 cards. You heard me, 5. And that's because of its GB3 effect. GB stands for Generation Break, and this only works if you have a G unit face up in the G zone or on your Vanguard circle. No, Generation Break can basically unlock a lot of effects when you're working with them in the game. With the G units and G Guardians, the game would go a lot faster. But this is only if you want to play in the premium format. Standard is basically just a standard deck. I already mentioned the draw triggers and on-trigger PGs in the previous lesson. So that's pretty much it for today's lesson. Next time, we will be talking what accessories you need to get when you're getting into the game. Until then, class dismissed!